So there I am. I'm driving down Pennant Hills Road. It's pretty busy and I need to turn right to go into the gym. And I'm distracted by something. I miss the turn off. And so I decide, hey, I'm just going to do a quick U-turn at that minor intersection of Pennant Hills Road and the M2. It's completely safe. Off I go. Then I start to hear sirens. I'm thinking, oh, what's the emergency, I wonder? And the sirens get closer and the policeman pulls directly behind me and says, you, pull over. I pull over, he comes up and he says, do you know that it's illegal to do a U-turn at that intersection? Yes, I do. Thanks so much for reminding me. You see, when I decide to turn when I want, I'm not just breaking the law. I'm declaring autonomy. I'm setting myself up as the ruler of this car. And I'm declaring myself Prince Dave of the Mazda 3. And I'm the king of Pennant Hills Road. And now I'm a little god. I make up my own rules. I drive my car. I draw the lines. It may look different. It may not look as serious, but let me take it a little bit further for you. You see, I'm going to have a beer as I drive my Mazda. Now, I can cope with one. Actually, I can probably have a second. And you know what? I'm going to have 3. Now, see, I decide at that point. Because I'm Dave, I'm Prince of the Mazda, I'm King of Pennant Hills Road. I make the rules, I draw the lines. Now, you may not be able to have 3 beers or 6 beers and go for a drive, but in my car, I can. Let me keep pushing it even just a little bit further. You see, there's people who declare their autonomy in terms of their sexuality. A letter came home to parents at a Sydney primary school to do with an incident with a man hanging around the school. And the way that he draws the line, he says that pedophilia is right in his house. And so the note comes around from the principal to the teachers and to the parents and says there's a man in our suburb trying to tempt kids in his house. And this is what he said to the judge. He said, I'm ahead of my time. In a generation, everyone will say what I'm doing is right because sexuality, sex with children, it's just preference. You see, what have I done? What have other people done? They've effectively said, I make the laws. I am self-law. I am autonomos. I'm autonomous. Remember autonomy? We started to look at this in our last session. And I don't know whether you ever thought about this, but that's essentially what we have said to God. Get lost, God. You see, last time we looked at page 1 of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, and we began to be introduced to God. We saw that he was a loving God. He was our maker, our creator. He was unique and supreme. He created effortlessly by his word. He created in an ordered and patterned and deliberate way in a world that was good. And we saw our place in creation, made in his image, given privilege and task. And we saw that last time there were guidelines on how we were to do this. We were free to eat from any tree in the garden, but we must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we're going to pick the story up this time. And here's the difficulty. As soon as we are told there's one thing that we should not do, well, that's what our focus turns towards. Because we don't like the idea of someone else in charge. And the next thing that happens in the story of God and his world is that we, encouraged by the serpent, that is the devil, we declare autonomy. We declare self-law. Have a look with me. Genesis chapter 3, starting at sentence 1. It says, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that's in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it or you will die. You will certainly not die, the serpent said to the woman. For God knows when you eat from it, your eyes will be open and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Well, that sounds good, thinks the woman. I'd like to be God. I'd like to know good and evil. So sentence 6, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and desirable for obtaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Now, what is it to eat from this fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Well, here's some things that it's not. It's not an apple. It wasn't just eating an apple. There's no mention of apples here, but it seems to come up all the time when we think about this. It's not sex either. It wasn't some secret code for having sex. Some think it was because straight afterwards they put their clothes on. But remember, sex is part of God's good creation. Well, what is it then? What is it to eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Well, here it's a declaration of autonomy. It's to declare self-rule, self-law in reaching out and taking the fruit from the tree that God has forbidden them to take from. When Adam does that, he's taking God's wisdom on his own terms. He's snatching the wisdom away from God. He says, I'm going to decide now what's best, not you, God. See, up until this point, Adam had trusted God. It accepted the good things that God, his creator, had given him. At this point, he declares, I know better. And so you could call it a quest for independence, a quest for self-rule. It's a search for freedom. It's a reaching out and grasping what God has kept from them. And they're saying, we don't want to live under your rule anymore, God. I want to make up my own rules. I want to assert my own ability to self-legislate. It's asserting human autonomy. You see, these declarations, they're not just about preference, speed limits, drinking while you're driving, lying, stealing, whether or not you have sex with children. Friends, it's because that there is a creator, a God who's standing over this world, that there are such things as right and wrong and good and evil. You see, why is it that pedophilia is evil? Not just socially unacceptable, not just something that I don't like but is always wrong and evil. It's because there's lines of right and wrong. They're global lines, and it's God in heaven who draws them. And when we make up our own lines, whether it's on drink driving or speeding or not paying taxes or doing whatever we want in the workplace or leaving the front door open, they're symptoms of our declaration of independence, our statement of rebellion. Now, here's the thing. Adam's autonomy at this point was our autonomy. This is a really important point. When Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, when they declared autonomy, you and I were right there with him. Now, those of us with a Western mindset, we have difficulties with this. We think in very individualistic categories. But when we're under Adam, we bear the responsibility for our declaration. And as a Westerner, I'm tempted to think, well, hang on, I'm responsible for what I've done. But I'm not just an individual. I'm part of a whole. You see, in the Second World War, when Britain went to war against Germany, Britain's Prime Minister at the time, Winston Churchill, told the nation this. He said, we shall fight them on the beaches. We shall fight them on the landing grounds and on the fields and on the streets. We shall fight them in the hills. We shall never surrender. And the people of Great Britain were right there with Churchill at war with Germany. And here back in Australia, our Prime Minister, Robert Menzies, he stood up and said, Great Britain has declared war upon Germany, and as a consequence, Australia is also at war. And the people of Australia were right there with Menzies and Churchill at war with Germany. But it wasn't just Menzies' war. It wasn't just Churchill's war. It was the whole of Great Britain's war. It was the whole of Australia's war. It was all of our war. You see, I'm not just an individual, I'm part of a whole. And when Adam declares autonomy against God, he acts as our leader. We're not just individuals. We're part of the whole, right there with Adam declaring autonomy against God. That's every one of us, from the oldest to the youngest. We are born at odds with God. And see, this seemingly simple and unoppressive act actually explains a lot as we look around the world when it comes to the questions of why is the world the way it is? Remember, that's the question we're answering. Why? Why is the world like it is? Why do bad things happen? Why is there suffering? This passage begins but doesn't give a complete answer to that question. Because what we've seen here is that we live in a broken world full of broken people. You see, there's a break in relationship in 3 places that weren't there before. The first break in relationship we see is with each other. It's how we are relating to each other, and it's that we're no longer at peace, but we're at odds with each other. You see, in the beginning, there is this beautiful picture of life in God's world. See the last line of Genesis 2 in sentence 25, it says, the man and the woman were both naked and felt no shame. Here's this beautiful picture. No shame, total peace, perfectly open with each other. No advantage was taken, living God's way. God was in charge. There's no need for clothes. No way anyone would take advantage of anybody else. No insecurities. But now there's autonomous people everywhere, making up their own rules, abusing and preying on the vulnerable. And so after we eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, sentence 7 of Genesis chapter 3 says the eyes of both were open. They realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. That once perfect relationship with each other, naked and no shame, now has a fracture, a rupture. God's beautiful world has started to be vandalized. And friends, all of us have been victims, haven't we, of other people's brokenness? I'm sure I don't have to convince you that hurt people hurt people. You know it and I know it. It's what we see all around us every day on the news. Stories of tragedies, of drunk drivers ploughing into kids, of murders, of poverty because of greed and selfishness and neglect of each other. And if you ever wondered why bad things happen, here's part of the Bible's answer. Bad things happen because we are autonomous, broken people, all trying to do our own thing in our time at our pace. And the result is suffering. But there's more. The second break in relationship we see is between us and the world around us. Not only are we damaging relationships with each other, but our relationship with the world is fractured. We don't rule it like God would have us rule it. And as a result, earth has fallen into disrepair. There's earthquakes, tsunamis, viruses. All these natural disasters point us back to the idea that the world isn't right. These things shouldn't happen. I'm sure you felt that. This shouldn't be how it is. But they do over and over. And each time it's a stark reminder that things aren't right. See, the Bible's explanation is that autonomy has entered and disrupted God's good world, his good relationships with each other. Now, you may think this answer to the why of suffering is incomplete, and I want to be upfront and say I think it is. But I also don't think any major religion or worldview gives the total answer. But here's what you need to weigh up. What is your answer? Which answer satisfies you more, and which answer can you trust? Because atheism's answer to these questions, personally, and probably no surprise to you, leaves me cold. You see, Richard Dawkins says that in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky. And we don't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. To me, that view is unlivable. This isn't a position that produces a society I want to be part of. I want people to care. I want justice to come. I want rhyme and I want reason. And even the person who is fiercely committed to atheism will cry out in the face of tragedy of their own family. You see, the problem of suffering is a problem for the Christian. But I actually think it's a greater problem logically for the person who doesn't believe. Where does that sense of justice come from? What base does the atheist judge that something is wrong or unjust or even unfair? And if you're listening and feel like I've been abandoned by, or you're abandoning God as the answer to this question, well, I think that leaves you with bigger problems than actually sticking with God. Now, if you want to dig more into this question, again, we have a free book we'd love to give to you. It's called If I Were God, I'd End All the Pain. Again, just get in contact through email, through the office. We'd love to get that free book to you. We come now to our third break in relationship, and this one's with God. Have a look at Genesis chapter 3, sentence 8. It says, "The man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden." You see, they used to live at peace with God, but now they're hiding behind a tree, and well, God is actually angry with their autonomy and their treason and their rebellion. This is not some impersonal matter when I thumb my nose at God and ignore his guidelines and I write my own rules. Well, let's see what happens. Sentence 9. "But the Lord God called to the man, 'Where are you?' He answered, 'I heard you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid.' He said, 'Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I had commanded you not to eat from?' The man said, 'The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit of the tree and I ate it.' Then the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is this you have done?' And the woman said, 'The serpent deceived me and I ate.'" Now, God's been clear about his expectations, and God's expectations have been defied, and God is angry. When we declare autonomy, he's angry. God's not feeble. God will hold people to account, and people will feel the force of his anger. You see, is it right for a loving God to be angry? Yes. Is to be angry somehow below God? No. You see, get this. The opposite of love is not anger. The opposite of love is indifference. And God does two things in light of his anger. Firstly, we're going to see he installs a king, and then he promises to crush all evil. See, come with me to Psalm 2. We're fast forwarding now, 1000 BC, 3000 years ago. The capital of Israel is Jerusalem. And now God is going to give his people a king called David. And there's this question all along, how's God going to fix the problem of self-rule, the autonomy problem? And there's hopes perhaps this guy, David, might be the one. And I want to take a look at this document. It's written to mark David's installation as king. It's a poem, really we call it a psalm, and it paints a picture starting what we've seen, humanity. It's full of autonomy, people in independence, a quest for freedom, and God is angry, rightfully so. These are creatures in rebellion against their creator. Things must be put right. So what does he do? He installs a king. Have a look, sentence 6 of Psalm 2. God installs a son as a king. He says, "I've installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain." Now, to our Western mindsets, this feels awfully weird. All over the Western world, kings or kings-to-be are not popular or impressive because we don't like monarchy. We know that power corrupts, and so to have a king who could come and actually do something in our experience because they're corrupt, then we're stuck in corruption. So why does God put a king and appoint a king? Well, this is a person who's going to rule God's earth properly. They're not going to declare autonomy. They're actually going to live God's way. Someone who will act in God's interest. Someone who's going to put the world right again. Someone who will deal with autonomy. A ruler who will restore the order to God's vandalized world. And this king, it tells us in sentence 7 and 8, it's going to have God as his father and great authority. And God will cause autonomous people to be obedient. That means there's going to be no more rebel nations or rebel people or rebel creatures. You see what's happening here, the implication? when this king rules, evil is overturned. Don't we want that? In our heart of hearts, don't we want that? This is the promise to the end of war, and don't you want that? Because aren't you like me, sickened by economic policies that we know are unjust? Sickened by drug trafficking that ruins people's lives? Sickened by the exploitation and using of people? Sickened by the violence and degradation of women? Sickened and shocked by anarchy and looting and destruction of cities? Horrified at some of the things that people do? Crying out to an end to war? I want a king who wants to come in and deal with that. But how will he do it? Well, we see how he's going to do it in sentence 9 of Psalm 2. He says, "You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery." I mean, pictured all autonomy, all evil, using, abusing, wrong, every bit of vandalism and autonomy in God's beautiful world. God's king takes his rod of iron and he crushes it. What does this look like? Well, I've got my own rod of iron. It's just a hammer. And I've got this plate. And imagine this plate is all autonomy. What is God going to do? Well, he's going to crush it. This king is perfect. He hates evil. He's going to crush and it's going to be shattered. Well, evil people are going to be crushed. How do you feel about this? Well, the part of me that is angry with the bad people wants that. I want an end to the destruction. I long for a day when evil is dealt with like this, when the world will be beautiful again, when the vandalism that tears our society apart is done away with, and people can live at peace with God and each other. And I know it can only come by the complete crushing of evil people, but on the other hand, I'm incredibly nervous. Because while in abstract, in principle, I want an end to evil, there's a difficulty because the problem is us. The problem is me. Because in the problem of autonomy and its consequences, I'm not innocent. I'm part of the problem. The problem is me. It's not just the drug pushers, the rapists, the autonomous rebels. It's me. And it's you. I've lived and acted against God. Lived and acted against society. There's things that I've done, I'm not going to share them with you. I'm actually too ashamed to share them. And so if God's going to deal with all the wrong, all the evil people, the way things stand, I'm on the wrong side of the iron. I'm on the wrong side of the stick. Now, I could be wrong at this point. You might be a little surprised at what we've seen here. You've clicked on this and you wanted to get introduced to God, and I said, hey, come take a walk in my worldview and have a look at the worldview of the Bible. And as we've journeyed, it may be the God that you have seen is absolutely not the God that you wish that was there. Perhaps the God you wish that was there isn't a God of justice. And tonight we've met the God of justice. He will not let evil go unchecked. We've also seen tonight, and there's going to be more on this next time, is that God is also a God of love, not just a God of justice. Because God will lovingly provide a way out. See, keep reading with me. I want to show you a glimpse of how God provides a way out. And I want to underline this is probably the most important thing I say. See those last words in sentence 9. He says, blessed are those who take refuge in him. We should take refuge. Run to him. You see, there's no refuge from God's king when he comes to crush evil. There's no place to hide when God's appointed king crushes evil. There's no refuge from him, no place to hide. But there's a marvelous promise of refuge in him. You see, I know I deserve to be crushed, but God offers some safety. And it's not because I deserve it. It's because he loves me and he's merciful and he provides mercy in his king. And we're going to see this spectacularly next time, but you're going to have to wait. But for now, let me say that the love and the mercy of God we're going to see next time, it only makes sense against the backdrop of the justice of God. And so for next time, how's God going to do this? How's he going to fix the relationship and restore God's rule? Well, that's for next time when we look at the death that changes everything. Hope you can join us then.